and collaborations, because Trina's background is applied behavior analysis, and she is a certified, board certified behavior analyst since 2001. Subsequent to that, she also qualified with a master's and a doctorate. She has been in academics and in practice, and done some absolutely prolific work in this field. So I'm so pleased, Trina, that you'll be sharing on this topic with us this afternoon, and that together with your co-presenter, Dr. Megan Kirby, who has recently, I believe, graduated with a doctorate. So congratulations on that, Megan. And yeah, so she's also from University of South Florida, has a master's in special education, and then I believe her doctorate was in community and behavior sciences. So yeah, so we really look forward to both of you sharing with us this afternoon. As we can tell by the overwhelming response we've had on this workshop, it is a hot topic and something that I think we all would wish to know more about. So without much further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much.
Apologies, maybe just some housekeeping. So apologies. I would ask just for participants to keep their videos and audio muted during the presentation. There is a lot of content to get through. That is what Trina has told me. So we will hope to have some question time at the end. But then also, if we run out, there will be opportunity maybe to just stay in the room for a while, or get into contact with the presenters afterwards. I hope that is in order. Mm-hmm. All right, now really over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Go ahead, Megan, advance the slides. So Megan's in control of the slides, and I just wanted to say a little bit about the Fulbright program, because that's the reason why we're in South Africa right now. So a few years ago, I traveled to South Africa, and I wanted to learn more about the Center for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. So I met Kirsten and Dr. Juan Borman, and it was such a great experience that I was like, I got to get myself back. And so I applied for Fulbright scholarship and won, but because of COVID, I wasn't able to come until 2022. Anyway, the Fulbright program is like a foreign exchange student or foreign exchange experience for professors and researchers. So that's kind of what I've been doing here in South Africa for the last 4 years. Anyway, go ahead and advance it. So Megan has joined me for just this week in South Africa, which is great because we've had a number of activities to do, and this workshop happened to coincide with the week she was here, so we're gonna try to address these goals for today. We know that there is a lot of, what's the right word, controversy or actually misinformation about applied behavior analysis, and so we really want you all to leave this training knowing the difference between the science of behavior and learning and what is typically called ABA therapy, right? And I put it in quotes.
Sorry, just a housekeeping. Miss Stikakane Zama, may I ask you to maybe just mute your microphone? I'm sorry, I see it's, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Trina, please carry on.
Yeah, yes, yeah, please, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between the science and this therapy, and then we also want you to have a little bit of skills or knowledge to walk away with. So we have chosen a couple topics. They may not be completely relevant to every single one of the participants, but we consider them kind of like the basic things for all therapists to be able to know and do. So we're covering those. That is our goal today. Go ahead. This is just kind of an agenda. I'm going to talk about science versus therapy. Megan is going to talk about what is behavior, functions of behavior, and functional communication training. And then I'm going to end with a session on pairing and conditioning. And it's okay that you don't know what that is right now. I'm going to explain what it is and why it's so important. And then if we have some time, we're just going to hit on like other applications of the science of behavior and learning to like a plethora of topics. Okay, so applied behavior analysis. We're going to talk about that. Go ahead, Megan. Get it. So I would call these faulty definitions of ABA, and I just want you to notice the references: Medical News Today, Autism Speaks, Very Well Health. These are like online references where maybe somebody is typing in and Googling what is ABA, and they're getting these definitions. These are the top definitions that come up. Applied behavior analysis is a type of therapy that focuses on teaching certain behaviors through a series of rewards and consequences. Okay. Applied behavior analysis is a type of therapy based on the science of behavior and learning. You're going to learn in a second that is a completely circular definition. circular, because applied behavior analysis is the science of behavior and learning. All right. So behavior or ABA is a type of therapy for autism that helps reinforce desired behaviors and discourage unwanted behaviors. So I'm telling you that these are the definitions that people get, but they're all wrong, because ABA is not a type of therapy. Okay, and so what we're going to be talking about is really what applied behavior analysis is, and why is this word or these three words getting put together in a way that is maybe not very accurate, and really what is ABA therapy in quotes. Okay. I would consider ABA incorrectly characterized as a therapy, even though even behavior analysts call it this. This is like behavior analysts who are in this industry for ABA therapy, they call it this. Unfortunately, they're causing more confusion in our field and with the consumers out there by not separating the science and this therapy. So applied behavior analysis is actually the science of behavior and learning applied to socially significant problems. That's the true definition of ABA. And it is not just applied to autism treatments. It's not just used in the treatment of kids with autism. And so behavior analysis is a much larger, more comprehensive approach to the study of behavior of organisms. Okay, so we can call that behavior analysis. It's this umbrella thing. And the primary objectives of behavior analysis are the discovery of principles and laws that govern behavior. Now think about that, discovery of principles and laws that govern behavior. That doesn't sound like the ABA therapy that you're probably familiar with. Can I just pause a second? I'm still hearing somebody's microphone on and it's a bit distracting. Can you please mute your microphone? Okay, thank you. I can't tell who it is, but thank you very much. Okay, so this idea of in the field of behavior analysis, part of the objective is to discover the principles and laws. This means that it's a science, just like physics or chemistry or biology. Behavior analysts are searching for principles and laws that govern behavior, like biologists are looking for principles and laws that govern life, right? So that is a key piece of behavior analysis. We also, as a larger, broader field, have the responsibility of extending and understanding the application of these principles across species. So it's not just children with autism, it's not just people, it's not just dogs, it's all animals. And in fact, there's a really, really cool study I saw recently. It was about the behavior of plants, okay, that follow these same principles. It was fascinating. So if you think about it, all species, all organisms, all living organisms behave. And so the identification of these principles and laws that govern behavior would apply to all organisms, all species, even plants. Okay. And then the final piece is the development of an applied technology. Now, it is that applied technology that most people in our society come up against. That's what they see. That's what gets reported in the news. That's what we're talking about. So ABA therapy, let's say as we might know it, is a type of applied technology, okay? But it is not the whole of behavior analysis. And we also can break behavior analysis into two major areas. One is the experimental analysis of behavior, which is really the natural science approach to understanding behavior, much like chemistry, biology, physics, right? And that's the first two objectives of discovering the principles and extending those principles across species. So that's responsibility of the experimental behavior analysts. And then there is the applied behavior analysis. And that's the use of those principles that are discovered by the experimental behavior analysts, but used in a way to solve practical problems. And the easiest way to remember the definition of applied behavior analysis is the science of behavior applied to socially significant problems. So the real, true definition of applied behavior analysis is this one. It's the science of behavior to socially significant problems. Megan, go ahead and advance. Let me tell you more about what ABA therapy really is. It is a set of teaching procedures that have their origin in some of the science of behavior and learning, right? And remember, the science of behavior and learning is applied behavior analysis, okay? But these therapeutic approaches only use a subset of the entire science to create a set of technology or tools, strategies, procedures, tactics, okay? Oftentimes, it involves outdated teaching approach called discrete trial teaching, which is quite structured and prescriptive. So oftentimes what's happening is that behavior analysts or people using this ABA therapy are actually using this approach called discrete trial teaching, which really originated in the 70s and 80s. And so it's a bit outdated, and it's really structured, really prescriptive, and it's not using all of the science, at least the way it is currently known. As you know, science evolves. And so often when people are using discrete trial teaching, they're not using all of our current science. They're still relying on what was done in the 70s or the 80s. So this program, or this teaching approach, discrete trial teaching, it is very prescriptive. And it's prescriptive because the individuals doing the delivery of it are not necessarily trained in the science of behavior and learning. They're only learning these little techniques. And so we would consider them to be technicians. And they don't know the analysis of the behavior. And that's more important, right? Having a full breadth and understanding of the science. So I would like to say a better name than ABA therapy is early intensive behavioral intervention, because that is most commonly recommended for young autistic children who have just been diagnosed, right? And then with older students or older children or adults, possibly, you might do something like a structured behavioral teaching, where it's a lot more, it's intense and it's one-on-one, but it's maybe not as intensive or as many hours as you might get in something like an intensive, early intensive behavioral intervention. So those are more accurate descriptions. So some side notes about these approaches, or these labels, I guess, is that not all autistic children actually need this level of intensive teaching. And not all children need it all of the time. As a matter of fact, that would be counterproductive for young kids to do something like 40 hours a week of this discrete trial training. It would be absolutely inappropriate developmentally, and nobody does anything for 40 hours a week, except for maybe working 40 hours a week on an assembly line, putting machines together or something like that. But we're talking about adults. So the point here is that what has happened so often, in the US, across the world, right? Not just in the US, but we've got this idea that this is the type of approach that autistic kids need, and therefore we recommend these really high level hours and intensive services, but that's actually not true. Not all autistic children need that level of service, and not all autistic children who need that level of intensive teaching need it all the time, or need as much as what's recommended. So this type of teaching, this discrete trial teaching, or EIBI, is always delivered by technicians, not the analysts themselves. So what that means is if there is a behavior analyst involved who has the credentials of a board certified behavior analyst at BCBAD, oh, I just said that wrong. Board certified behavior analyst at BCBAD. So funny, I just messed up the initials. BCBA, they're not the ones doing the primary delivery. It's usually like paraprofessionals, people who have maybe, like a high school diploma or a bachelor's degree, but not in behavior analysis. So they're learning just techniques and they're delivering them in a prescriptive way, okay? And that becomes a problem, because if they're not doing it very well because they're just implementing a procedure, then people think that's what behavior analysts are doing. And so there's like it's kind of like an association problem. The behavior analysts, those who are board certified, are being judged by the abilities and delivery of these technicians who have little to no training. So it's also, this type of teaching is often not balanced according to developmental appropriateness or consideration of generative skills or naturally motivating conditions. And this is one of my, okay, hold on a second. Kirsten, you have something you need to interject?
Sorry, Trina, apologies. I'm wondering whether Megan can maybe also switch off her mic while you are talking, and maybe...
I cannot. I can't because I can't access this is all I see.
Oh, I understand. I wonder if you can maybe... Oh, I understand. Yes.
Can you turn me off? I mean, as moderator?
No, I can't because you are a moderator. Oh wait,
I can
make you.
I
Yes,
just muted her.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. That will be helpful. And Trina, maybe, I don't know if you want to switch off your video. Your sound cuts out a little bit every now and again. Apologies.
Okay, we'll try that.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, we'll do our best here. Okay. Okay, so I was saying this third little plus sign here in my bullet is that sometimes when we're delivering these kinds of intensive types of teaching, development is not always considered, right? Because it's being implemented by people who may not know and understand child development. It's also delivered in a way that's pretty inflexible. And so it might not be producing generative skills. And then often it is done in a way that's using like contrived reinforcers, things that are just not naturally motivating to kids, like edibles or, you know, like tokens or things like that. And so the naturally occurring motivating conditions are not always there or available. I think that what people often see is a very rigid one-size-fits-all approach, and which is really unfortunate, of course. And then this is a very legitimate and kind of more recently heard. It's not that it's been just a recent issue, it's just now it's being heard. But that this type of ABA therapy, again, air quotes, because I don't like the term and I don't want to validate it by using the term. But it often disregards social validity, which means really just how does the people who receive the therapy perceive it, like, is it acceptable to them? And then client and family preferences, like, are those being considered? Often they're not. And we often see this kind of therapy being done, you know, to individuals without considering their interests and strengths. And when it's delivered like this would be considered ableist, right? Because the tenets of anti-ableism or the neurodiversity movement are the opposite of these things, right? That you always want to integrate the client's preferences and you want to know if they like the treatment, what kind of treatment they would like, what goals they want to achieve, and how to integrate their interests and strengths, right? So there's a whole thing we could talk about that, but I'm not going to be able to talk about anti-ableism at length today, but I want to make the point that the science itself, so the true definition of applied behavior analysis, is not ableist. A science cannot be ableist, but its execution in therapeutic contexts can be, and is very often ableist in its execution. And that is where we're getting so many problems. It really has to do with that provider and whether they are listening to their consumers, working collaboratively, or using, you know, some sort of mechanism to understand the quality of life and the goals for that client, and understanding their preferences, interests, and their strengths, and being able to integrate that into the therapeutic context. It can be done using the science of applied behavior analysis, and it is done very, very well in some places. And I have friends and colleagues who continue to deliver like these structured behavioral teaching sessions in a very non-ableist way. And I think as a field generally, they're making a lot of progress. We're not necessarily seeing that progress take hold everywhere in the country, and in South Africa too. There are some great pockets of ABA-based therapies and education, and some that are not. The trouble is that the consumers and the other professionals don't necessarily know the difference of what a non or an anti-ableist version of this application looks like compared to an ableist version. And then I've already kind of like criticized this issue of sometimes ABA therapy is overprescribed. It's very expensive, and it honestly results in a very inflexible learning, which isn't very good for kids, right? We want to have them be more flexible learners. So here are the problems with this incorrect characterization, like associating ABA with this therapeutic approach that is rigid, possibly ableist, and rigid in so many ways. So when ABA therapy is done poorly, right, and keep in mind, it's probably done poorly a lot because the people delivering that type of therapy are not certified behavior analysts. And by the way, to become certified, you have to have at least a master's degree plus 1,500 fieldwork experience hours supervised. And that's the minimum. That wouldn't even be like high quality. That's the minimum. And that's a pretty intensive, it's a pretty intensive training. And it takes quite a while to become an expert, okay? And to be able to use the science in its fullness, okay? So when it's done poorly, it reflects poorly on the science of behavior and learning generally. And of course, many of us who are, you know, like we're hardcore scientists, and it's like very discouraging and so disheartening when people are like, ABA is so terrible. I was like, wait, what are you talking about? It's a science. What's going on? And so when people continue to characterize it as this therapy and only understand it as a therapy, that association is carrying on to the science, and that's a problem. So people who have had bad experiences with poorly delivered ABA therapy generalize their distaste to the entire science of behavior and learning. And really, I think that the therapy industry has hijacked the name of the science for their therapy, thinking that that is somehow a better sell, right? And that's actually the problem. It's the industry of autism therapies that has hijacked the name. They could have called it like early intensive behavioral intervention and structured teaching. That would have been much, much better. But adding the name of the science gave them some sort of credibility, right? But now you can see that that association is actually causing problems for the science, right? So professionals, things like, you know, people like teachers, SLTs, OTs, psychologists, business owners, trainers, anybody who have a negative idea about it will not engage in continuing education or learn more about the science of behavior and learning because they have this idea that that's what it is, that's what it looks like. So as a result, we may have few professionals equipped with the knowledge of the science that can help reduce problem behavior and effectively teach desirable behaviors. So that's kind of been the message that I have been given to Kirsten since I've been here. It's really unfortunate that people are like, oh no ABA for me, please, because the science is actually quite powerful. And it is applied in many, many contexts, not just these autism therapies. And when they're applied to autism therapies, is often not done well. And so I have no problems with people say I don't want ABA therapy. Neither do I. As a matter of fact, I've been in this field for more than 20 years. And the first time I saw this ABA therapy, which I would really characterize as discrete trial teaching, I was like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? And why? Why are you teaching that kid, that 3-year-old, color words? Like silly things that they didn't have a reason for. And when I would ask them, it's like, where in the science does it say that you need to teach that kid to look at you, right, with eye contact? It doesn't. It doesn't. The science doesn't say that. However, the science is very powerful. There are many ways in which the science of behavior and learning can be used to teach besides that intensive, rigid way. And I really want people to understand that the science can be useful to them and they don't have to do that ABA therapy the way they've seen it done. maybe. And actually, almost every evidence-based teaching procedure that are out there for teaching, for speech and language, for occupational therapy, doesn't matter what it is, those are actually based on the science of behavior and learning. They're not ABA therapy, right? But they are based on that same science. We all draw from that science. So I just put in a few things that are based on the science that we're not really going to be able to talk much about today. But like when I was working with autistic children, I had a side business. All of the work I did with the kids was play-based communication, and I did summer camps, and I did friendship groups. All of it, though, was based on the science of applied behavior analysis without it being that rigid version of ABA therapy that people are familiar with. The teaching of functional daily living skills, even motor skills, so fine motor, gross motor, all the teaching benefits from that science. Job skills, personal hygiene, social routines and friendships, time management. What about tolerating sensory stimuli? There's a huge literature around how to do that in the science of behavior and learning. Learning new languages, literacy. I happen to do a lot of literacy and academic work with typically developing kids or kids with disabilities. And people sometimes go, yeah, but you're a behavior analyst. I was like, yes, so what's your point? Like the science applies there too, and actually really quite well. How about game-based learning, self-management, professional development? I can go on and on. And I also wanted to point out that just today I came across an article that said it was called ABA from A to Z. It was like 350 applications of the science to different domains, 350 domains. And that's an article that just came out in April. So one of the things I wanted to show you was just a small clip. I'm just going to tell you what this is. This is summer camp for autistic kids where I used to live. And all of it is, all the teaching procedures are based on the science of behavior and learning, or ABA. And we did none of the one-on-one structured teaching, discrete trial teaching kind of approach, none of it. So what you see in the foreground is like an art center, and then over here, this teacher in the back with the bun on her head, she's reading a book to kids, and they're having a conversation about some concepts in there about cowboys. So I'm just going to show, just do like 20 seconds of it, Megan, so they can just see that this is ABA, but it's not the same thing as the ABA therapy that people are used to. See if it works.
Oh, look at this big gold piece. Or, okay, you can turn the next page. That part took a step back. It's aiming up. I'm so smart. I know what it is. I aimed right at that. Right. Black Bart pulled a can of beans out of his stuff bag. All
Right, that's probably good.
Okay.
All right, so I'm hoping that you're getting the point that the science is what's powerful. So all learning, regardless of who the learner is or the goal of teaching, adheres to the same principles of the science of behavior and learning. Just like imagine that you were an engineer and you needed math for your job, right? So if you're in the business of teaching children or adults new skills, you need this science to be able to do your job, right? It's just like power. It's the power of math for engineers. It's these principles for teachers and therapists. So the knowledge of the science gives you the power to teach. And I believe very strongly that the science should be available to all teaching professions, not just those who are using a specific set of procedures. And there is that sentiment in our field that no, wait, we've got to reserve it. This is behavior analysis and only people who are certified can use it, which is crazy because the principles exist all the time, anywhere, whether or not somebody is certified for it. And psychologists and teachers and good SLTs, they already know it. My conversations, and I've watched Juan and Kirsten, they're actually talking about principles of the science. They just don't call it ABA, right? Because people have a misunderstanding of what that is. All right, go ahead, Megan. So of course, the next few slides, I'm going to turn it over to Megan. We're going to give you a little bit about the science of behavior. Now, keep in mind, it is much, much larger than what we're going to give you today. We're just going to hit on a couple principles. To really gain an understanding, you need 2 years worth of coursework and a lot of applied supervision and field experience hours. But we want to give you a little bit so that you have a bit of a knowledge to be like, oh, okay, that actually applies to what I'm doing. Okay, so learning about the science of behavior is like studying languages. The more you use it, the easier it becomes. So we would love for you to use a little bit of what we give you today so it becomes easier, and hopefully you'll be interested in learning more about it. Thank you. Hold on, Megan. I gotta unmute you. Oh. It seriously is not letting me unmute you. Why was I able to mute to? Did you get it?
I turned it back on and we'll get back to it. Hold on.
I was able to mute you. Why wouldn't it unmute you? That's silly.
I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay. All right, 1 second. Let me just share this presentation again. Thank you all. Thanks, Trina, for that. Okay. All right, I apologize in advance for this. It's going to look like you're going down a tunnel. All right. Here we are, back to this. Okay, so I'm Megan Kirby, and then we're just going to get into what is behavior, right? Just to start off with the basic underlying principles, now that you have an understanding of what ABA is and is not. Behavior, what it is anything that a living organism, an organism is living, right? So it's something that they say or do. It's just an interaction between cells, synapses in our brain. There's a phrase that we use in the field called, if a dead man can do it, it's not behavior. If anybody's interested, there's a test that was done, an experiment with mummies to prove that, right? So we don't disregard the fact that there's biology because cells behave, but the science and the application of it, we emphasize the environment because those are things that we have control over, that we can change and manipulate and improve the lives of the people that we work with as well as our own, right? And so what we do in our field is really focus on what's observable and measurable, and again, what we can have influence over. So I just want to point out that all living things behave, okay? And when we say, oh, the student had a behavior today, what most people are talking about are problem behaviors, but behaviors happen so often that that's like a minute, tiny bit of what a human being is in the whole day. So behaviors themselves are rarely problems. The observable aspects, seeing someone's chest rise and fall, that's breathing, right? I can observe clapping and I could define it so that you also could take account as to how many times someone else would be clapping. Sitting in a seat versus standing, I can observe those things. I have to be very specific about that because if I just said, will comply or will follow a direction, you want to be a little bit more specific, right? Measurable things, and that's why we have 2 types of behavior that we work with in our science, and that's public behavior, things that you and I, everybody, we could look at something and measure it in some way. But there's also private behavior, and we don't discount that. And private behavior are the things that, if you're working on New Year's Eve and you make a resolution for the rest of the year, right? And you're having thoughts and you want to say, I really want to get better, improve my self-confidence. Really what you could be measuring are your thoughts, right? And so every time you had this self-doubt, you could take a tally mark and that would be a behavior that you're measuring. So we work with both public and private, more like the counseling side is more on the private behavior, your thoughts, reducing suicidal ideations. There are behavior analysts who work in that field as well as counselors, right? But just remember, it's the public side that we're going to focus on today. So when we talk about behavior problems as well, usually it's on the left-hand side. We're talking about behavioral excesses. These are problem behaviors that occur way too often. But there are also things related to that that are behavioral deficits, right? Or areas of weakness that need to be improved upon. These are behaviors that don't occur enough, and they're not really fluent within the learner's repertoire, right? And so challenging behavior comes about, right, when you have these behavioral excesses. So they're behaviors that, like talking out or running around the classroom, that interfere in learning, interfere with social development, constantly interjecting, not giving or taking turns in a conversation with another, not asking questions about another's interests. Those all affect, right, social development. And it's not unique to children with disabilities. I myself, when I was talking about those New Year's resolutions, I need to learn to not interject, as my husband would say. So I'm working on, listening more than talking or trying to fill in what I think he's about to say. But when you have these challenging behaviors, if there's some kind of weakness or area of weakness in one's language repertoire, all of those skills, what tends to happen is that the challenging behavior will emerge, this problem behavior that is not appropriate for having your wants and needs met. And so what we'd like to sit back and think is that, all behavior serves a purpose. It's functional for that individual. We only do what works. And so the principle number one that we were going to focus on is that behavior is strengthened, right? Good or bad. So when I'm talking about behavior, there's no connotation about whether it's good or bad. Is strengthened or weakened by what happens immediately after. What are the changes that are in the environment that occur that either make it more likely that the behavior keeps happening or make it less likely or weaken it? So it also matters that we have these antecedents. So this is the ABC. It's one of the basic founding principles of what we're talking about, both in the science about how to measure it, but also today, so that, work ourselves out of a job, Trina and I. But basically, when we talk about antecedents, it's what happens immediately before this behavior of interest, good or bad. It could be the setting, so what's happening in the setting. It could be a change, right? It could be a change in activity. Like, for example, I could take away some difficult work or cut the number of math problems in half and make things easier for someone. That's a change in activity still. It could be a direction, like go wash the dishes. It could just be someone else that appears in the environment that wasn't there before. That is a change, right? So then those are the things that precede and set up a behavior of interest, right? Anything that a living organism or an organism says or does. But what really makes it more or less likely that we would see that behavior again is the consequence. Okay, that's what happens immediately after, not hours and hours later, but what happens immediately after this behavior. So let's say that I am having a conversation with my husband. We're talking. I interject and I interrupt him in his story, right? He can either reprimand me, so that's a consequence, and if I care about being reprimanded, it makes me feel bad, I'm probably less likely to interrupt. If I don't, then it's not going to work. That consequence isn't going to work. And so a consequence that he might have is that he just kind of walks out of the room since I'm not listening to him, not letting him talk. And so there are different consequences that can have an effect on the behavior of interest, right? And they all contribute to whether we see the behavior again. But there has to be a pattern, right? So let's get into that. So here's the layout of what antecedent behavior consequence looks like, an ABC chart. Let's start with the first row. A telephone rings, you answer the phone, and the immediate consequence after that answering the phone, you're talking to a friend. So the next time a telephone rings, you may be more likely to pick up the phone because it was a friend. If it was a bill collector, see how that consequence could change. We'd be probably less likely in the future. If we ended up talking to someone who we owe money to, right? Another antecedent, we know we're cooking eggs and they're done cooking. I turn off the stove. Well, the consequences then, the power goes off and it cools down. I don't waste electricity and I avoid starting a fire. If I didn't engage in the behavior of turning off the stove and I left it on, those eggs would burn, or whatever's still left in the pan would burn, and there's a fire. And it's probably really unlikely that I'm going to leave the stove on again, right? Because I had a negative experience. There are some other examples, right? So you could have a child and you tell them they can have ice cream after they eat their dinner, right? A first and a then. The child eats the dinner and then they get ice cream. Or, you could be in a classroom setting. This happens often, or even it happens often if you're in a public setting and you have children and you're talking to other adults, right? And the children are deprived kind of this adult attention. What ends up happening is they all engage in problem behavior because that's what gets the attention of the adults, right? And so although it might be a negative reprimand or something, what we would consider aversive, the child is getting attention, which is what they wanted. So they're only doing what works because being good didn't get them any attention, right? The quiet ones kind of go unnoticed sometimes. And then we also have another example of when teacher would say, time to clean up. If a child laid on the floor and tripped other kids after that direction was given, then a consequence immediately could be that the teacher then has that student or child sit away from everybody to make sure that they stop hurting their friends or they're out of that situation, right? So when we think about functions, like if we only do what works, everything happens for a reason, we don't always know that reason. We collect data. So I want to point out that I don't know if behaviors are going to keep happening. You have to have a pattern, right? But what ends up happening is that some behaviors continue, they persist. And specifically when we talk about challenging behavior, there's challenging behavior that just seems to continue no matter what we do, right? And that's because it's coming into context with what we say, it's being reinforced somehow. Something in the environment, that consequence, is making it that the behavior is likely to continue to happen or even strengthen, right? Another type of consequence is punishment. And it's not typically what we may think of like, getting swatted by a parent or anything. But punishment is actually a reprimand if it results in a decrease in that behavior or it weakens it. So I keep going back to that example of like, if you're having a conversation, with my husband, and he gives me a reprimand and I feel really bad, I'm less likely and I stop interrupting him in his conversation about his day. That reprimand is actually punishment. It's not reinforcement. So in general, if the consequence, that C, strengthens the behavior or maintains it, it's considered a reinforcer. If a consequence weakens that behavior or like just completely terminates it, gets rid of it, we don't see that challenging behavior anymore, then we say that consequence was a punisher. So in summary, we have these two effects on behavior. The behavior can maintain and strengthen, go up, or it can go down and sometimes disappear altogether, right? And so it's a little bit beyond, but we have positive reinforcement. So reinforcement meaning the behavior continues to occur. The positive in front of that word refers to we added something to the environment that made it more likely for that behavior to occur. So if I'm talking about challenging behavior, I'm adding attention, right? When the child is attention deprived, I'm adding attention. Well, it's more likely that kid's going to engage in that same behavior that got them attention in that instance. So that's positive reinforcement. And it's not necessarily like a positive thing. It's not stickers and candy. And then for challenging behavior, negative reinforcement. We take something away that makes it more likely for that challenging behavior to continue to occur or actually strengthen. So that's an example of, the student might be doing something that's really difficult for them. And let's say it's a worksheet and let's make it even harder, writing. And so they're writing, they tear up their worksheet, okay? And if I say, all right, well then you're just gonna have to do it later, and I take away the worksheet task and allow them to go do whatever they wanna do, and tomorrow the same thing happens, worksheet's actually probably ripped up sooner, right? And I never replace that, I'm removing this demand to complete worksheets. And so I'm strengthening the ripping the paper behavior, right? So those are those reinforcement effects. Punishment effects. Let's say I have challenging behavior and I want to see it go away. I can add something that reduces the future likelihood that it's going to happen again. Or I can engage in negative punishment, which is taking something away that reduces, the likelihood that behavior will happen again. An example of that would be like taking away privileges, right? And it makes it more likely that the child will not engage in that challenging behavior again. So in summary, right? So reinforcement, a behavior happens because it's been reinforced. It continues to happen. Behavior is either, the consequence is a desirable event, something that maintains the behavior, or it's going to be followed by something that's undesirable that they want to escape or get out of. That's not, it's aversive, okay? And so when we talk about reinforcement, just remember that the behavior, challenging behavior especially, is maintained, or it can worsen and strengthen because it's been reinforced. Now, let's talk about those two things, right? You could have some kind of consequence where the reinforcement is a desirable event that's obtained, right? So you could obtain an internal stimulation, so sensory input, right? So if I'm, let's say, let me keep going. Or I can obtain external stimuli, like let's say a toy, right? I can also, the consequence can also be getting out of something like that has been caused. So if I have a toothache, a behavior that I would do that gets rid of that toothache. Do you have to interject? Okay, sorry, I heard myself. You could also have this where the consequences that you get out of an aversive situation, like going clothes shopping. Okay. Now, in this case scenario right here, we have that desirable event, that sensory input, right, is what we get from the behavior. I can also get attention as an external stimuli, so that parent's attention that I wanted so badly, or I can get toys or food or some kind of tangible, right? Then in this case right here, if I have pain that's ongoing and I engage in a behavior, that behavior is most likely sensory in nature, right? And it gets rid of that pain, okay, temporarily. So an example of that, a lot of times young children, actually anybody, if you have a toothache, you have this dull ongoing, and it can get really worse, right? If you've ever had a toothache that ended up needing a root canal, like a lot of attention, you might have students or children, you might encounter them where they might bite other people or bite on clothing, let's say, and rip it from their mouth. I've had students that did this in my classroom, and turns out we didn't know they had such horrible tooth conditions and toothaches, and they weren't able to vocally express that to us. So biting was the problem behavior, but what ended up happening in this, there was a dull, ongoing pain, right? And if I bite on something and yank it from my mouth, I actually am distracted from this pain by more pain or adrenaline that I get, because that ripping out actually totally distracted me from this dull, ongoing pain. That's sensory input that in the moment, made me forget about my other pain. So that's an example. And another example of undesirable event, right? Like to get out of something aversive. Attention, right? Might get me out of something, like a parent might be able to get me out of, the store because I don't want to be there. So I engage in challenging behavior that results in me getting, pulled out to go spend time with grandma. So I don't have to go shopping anymore. And then the same thing is right there. Okay. So going back to this now, and this is the same situation where we have the ABCs. The reason for the behavior, the reason why it continues to occur, and let's say these are all patterns. These aren't just like, I wouldn't know the function or the consequence. I wouldn't know if a behavior will keep occurring in the future. I can't read, the future or predict it. But let's say these things happen a couple times or a few times, right? If that were to happen, then the actual reason for the behavior right here is to get something good, right? I answer the phone because I get to talk to a friend, and that's to get something good. It improves my life. The eggs are done cooking. I turn off the stove. The consequence of not doing so would be my life would get worse, right? So I'm avoiding something bad by turning off the stove. Now, in this case right here, the first then, you do the work or you do the demand or activity because in the end, you're getting something good out of it, okay? Then in this situation right here, eating a snack, the teachers are talking, and the child dumps their milk onto the floor. Well, I'd probably want some more information about that. Because in the end, right, the teachers scold him, ask why did he do it, get him a towel and help him clean it up. But I don't really know why he did that. I'm going to need a little bit more information, right? I can't assume it was to get attention from the teachers. And then in this one right here, where the teacher says time to clean up, and the child lays on the floor and trips other kids, and so I move that child to a chair away from everybody so they stop hurting the other children. Well, I'm doing that, me, to avoid the bad that's happening, okay? And so that right there is an example of cleaning, or sorry, excuse me, in this example, Katie is avoiding the bad. The bad is timing to clean up, right? So Katie didn't have to clean up any toys. She's been removed from the environment. She gets to sit over there, and yes, she's away from the other kids, but who's not cleaning up? Katie. So the second principle that I would talk about is that behavior responds better to positive reinforcement, right? It strengthens or allows it to continue. I'm just going to ask if everybody can make sure that mic is muted. I'm getting some feedback. Okay, so behavior responds better to positive reinforcement, but unfortunately, that means all behavior. That means behavior that is disruptive, dangerous, irritating. We tend to pay attention to those things in our environment because by attending to it, we get it to turn off, and our lives as adults become better when whatever it is that's annoying us or causing a problem goes away, right? But for that individual who's engaging in the challenging behavior, we may be reinforcing it by giving them attention. Right? And so there are a lot of people who say, oh, well, we don't want to reinforce this behavior, but I can understand why it happens. Right? I've been a teacher in a classroom. I understand. I need to turn it off. But sometimes, negative, coercive, punitive techniques are typically used to deal with those unwanted behaviors, like taking away child's opportunity to go run and play with other students. Horrible. And then other things like threats of punishment, like, oh, well, you're not going to get a pizza party at the end of the week if you don't turn in this form. Again, unless you have control over that situation, but these are threats, and these are very negative, coercive, or punitive techniques that are used. And that's, again, not what we want to do. These consequences, those things, have short-lived effects, and they also become paired with the person who's delivering them, right? And so those individuals who take things away, who threaten to punish, right? Those individuals become paired with these negative things, and I'm sorry, I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time with you if that's what I associate you with, right? So what do we do with all this challenging behavior then? So if we can't reinforce it, I'm saying can't because that's what people say. Sometimes yes. But if we do not want to reinforce this behavior, right? We want to decrease this challenging behavior that's a behavioral excess. We don't also need to ignore it, because ignoring it can be problematic. I don't ignore another child hitting, another child. I don't ignore, you can't ignore that. I don't ignore, when I was teaching, I was bit several times by my students. In retrospect, I would have been teaching differently because the child was communicating they did not want to be there. But bit several times by students, well, I can't ignore that. Why? Why would I sit there and let the child just chomp down on my hand and pretend like it wasn't happening? My face is not like blank, right? I'm wincing. And so we don't want to use that ignoring. We want to see a reduction in problem behavior. Well, then we need to figure out why it keeps happening, right? The why it works. So this is where we get into the form of behavior versus the function, the why. Okay. So the form of behavior is what it looks like, right? Stomping a feet, hitting others, screaming no, falling on the floor with just like flat out floppy body is what I call it. Those things look very different from one another, but they all might be serving the same function. And in that case, the function or the purpose of the behavior is the why we do what we do, right? I might stomp my feet or hit others or scream no or just fall on the ground to get out of something, right, that I don't want to do. Okay? And so topography is what it looks like, the form, but they can all share some similar functions, right? So this is where communication comes in. First, infants cry to let us know what they want or what they don't want. These sound effects, Trina. Children with disabilities engage in problem behavior. Often when they are unable to communicate it effectively through vocalized speech, pointing through augmentative or alternative communication, devices or systems, because it's letting us know what they want or what they don't want, because it works for them, those behaviors. Kids and adults without disabilities engage in behaviors to communicate their wants and needs all the time. We do it all the time. If you can vocalize no, that's great. If you can't, you just shake your head because maybe you're in a place where you should be quiet. You can also text, right? So there's many different forms that can have the same function. And when we view behavior problems as a form of communication, if we start to look at challenging behavior with this light of like, oh, well, you know what? I don't blame them. They're only doing what works and they don't have the tools to communicate it differently, then maybe I can reduce problem behavior by focusing on that communication piece. What does this child, student, adult need from me so I can help them learn skills that will be improving their life? Okay, so going back to this, right? So we have these desirable events and getting out of things. I'm gonna go ahead and time's sake. Go faster, right? These things actually, if I'm engaging in challenging behavior, I need to look at, the functions at the bottom, right? I might say, "Ooh, this feels good." If I'm looking at, some kind of my behavior getting me something like attention, I might teach a student to say, "Come here," or, "Hey, look at me." Like these are the things, right, that the functional communication or the communication aspects of what the behaviors might be implying. Something like, "I want that," or "I want to do that," right? And then something like, "I want to be by myself." So how do I get out of a situation where I do want to be by myself, but maybe hitting others that results in me being put in timeout or like put on the side away from everybody? Maybe I wanted that, right? I just didn't know how to communicate to you, "I want alone time. Please leave me alone." And similarly, developmentally, children who without disabilities can vocalize something like, "No, I don't want to." Now, whether or not we think that that's appropriate and we want them to follow our directions, they still can tell us that. And so if an individual student or child, adult is unable to do so, they're going to find another way besides vocalization to communicate that need. So right now, sometimes the problem behaviors, these challenging behaviors, are easier for the learner. That's why they're doing them, right? It's way easier than if they were to engage in those statements, right? So vocalization especially is very difficult for a lot of individuals. That's why we're in their lives, right? And so we're trying to teach them a new skill. And we have to step back and think, you know what? It's not that this child wants to be bad. They don't want to make my life, difficult. They're crying. They're tired. Their face is red. They're sweating. There's a lot of calories exerted in problem behavior, like in tantrums. No one wants to be that, right? And I hope we all basically understand that. But like, no one wants to be disliked. No one wants to be that. No one wants to engage in problem behavior. It just might be easier for them to do so than those skills that we probably should teach. And so if we want to see a reduction in these challenging skills, we want to increase those appropriate behaviors that kind of meet the same need. They're just currently not in that student's repertoire. They're absent, they're very limited, or they're impaired, so that we just need to teach them. So going back to that function, in order to understand, why is this child doing this? You know, why does it work for them? What is working for them? You know, what are they getting out of this? Then I need to start looking at that relationship between, you know, what was the antecedent? What's the setting? Was there a change in the environment? And then I look at the behavior, right? And then the consequence. And in the antecedent piece, which we haven't touched on in a little while, there are things that are called slow and fast triggers that we're about to go over, right? And those things can actually, in combination, so the A and the C, in combination, can tell us what this function is, right? Never in this situation do I need to be very specific about form. So if a student hits another student or they bite themselves, I don't know why they're doing it just based on that form of behavior. I need to have more information about the A's and the C's. So influences on behavior can be slow triggers or fast triggers. Slow triggers are conditions, sometimes very complex, you know, there's a lot of information that goes into them, and they occur at the same time as the problem behaviors, or they can be more distant in time. I'll give you some examples in the next slide. We call the distant things setting events, and then the other conditions, like fast triggers, can be simple, specific antecedents. The consequences, right, are those reinforcers, that why the problem behavior continues to happen. Okay, so let's talk about slow triggers first. This might be a new term for you all, or a new concept. But this is where biology and physiological just states of being matter, right? So if a student is coming to you hungry, that's probably going to affect the way they learn that day, right? So nutrition. If a student has a medical condition, you know, seizures, obsolete seizures that we may not even recognize or know about yet, they could have issues with the gut. There's a connection between autism and gut, you know, just, I can go into that another day. Medication. Student forgets their medication or they took medication that may make them drowsy, or they forgot the medication that they're going to need to help them focus. Sleep deprivation. Someone doesn't come to school with enough sleep, we're going to see the ramifications of that, right? Or illness. You just don't feel good, and we all know this. You don't feel good, you show up to work, you're not your best, right? But you're there, but you're just not your best. So those are the days that we don't want to do the hardest work because we're not going to do it very well. Then we also have social context, right? So the slow triggers like redirections, interest in the activity, the difficulty level of the text. Sorry, if you give me trigonometry, like my motivation is going down, probably really hard, and then I'm not going to like it. I might come to school and I might be the best behaved student in my classroom, and there's a lot of disruptive behaviors in the classroom, and I'm new. And I come to school and I don't have any problem behaviors that are as bad as my peers, but if I don't have my bucket filled with attention from the teachers and I look around and realize everybody else is getting attention for those problem behaviors, I might acquire new behaviors, right? I might learn what to do that works to get that adult attention. Okay. It also could be number of people. You know, very busy classrooms could be very distracting. Well, so many stories to go with this. It also, the physical context, right? The location. These are the things that go into mattering as to whether or not something is likely to happen. If it's a new location or a familiar location, my daily schedule, the weather, the time of day, the proximity of the adult to the learner. So we tend to put the students that need a little bit of prompting and reminders right up front near the teachers. And then sensory information too. So when we talk about slow triggers, you can see this wide variety, the complexity of those, right? But over and under stimulation, if we just talk about the sensory needs right here, are slow triggers as well. So satiation, fancy word, right? We're having too much of something, you know, just enough or too much. And then deprivation is not having enough of something. You've been deprived of it, right? So when we think about you know, our sensory systems, right? When they're dysregulated, we often we'll engage in problem behavior to bring it into balance. So for me, if I'm very sleepy, I'll engage in a behavior like tapping or bouncing my feet, right? Chewing gum, that will help, you know, get me to focus again and bring my systems into balance. If I'm overstimulated, there are behaviors I might engage in that will help me bring my system back into balance. And students, human beings do this, okay? So it's not just limited to individuals with disabilities. So now we have these like slow and fast triggers. Then we have to think about the consequences. So we have all these things setting up the likelihood whether or not we're about to see problem behavior or good behavior, but problem behavior, that all these ingredients. But also what happens then? So if the behavior occurs, what happens really also matters and kind of like ties it all in. So if I'm engaging in some behaviors like climbing, singing, stimming, what we know is stimming, maybe it's like hand clapping or bouncing, then those might be a sensory consequence, right? If I get smiles, hugs, or if I'm scolded, right, and reprimanded, that's still attention. That's the consequence that I get. If I engage in a behavior and it results in, hey, food, stickers, you get to go play outside, then that's getting something. That's an object or event. If I engage in a behavior, and then let's say I feel sick, right? Then maybe I get out of something. Like if I'm hungry and engage in a behavior, I get food, right? The consequence would be getting food. Then I get rid of my hunger, right? So you can just think about these things right here. You can also have escape from attention where you don't want the attention. And so your behavior gets you out of it. And then you can also engage in behaviors that help you get out of aversive situations, doing things that you don't want to do. And again, this science of behavior learning, this carries through, and I'm hoping you're realizing that, and thinking about situations, behaviors that you do. Right now, I'm looking at this slide that some of these consequences, because I can think of a few things for that last one. So this is where we want to think about the function. Why is it that this student keeps doing this behavior? I need to define what that behavior is first. I need to define it. Like, what does it look like? And then I want to record it, get a piece of paper and record it on a log. And I'll show you an example of that coming up. So every time that behavior happens, when I'm able to observe, I'm going to document it happening. And so I might write down the time, where were we, because sometimes that matters. Who else is in the room? Because that sometimes matters. Sometimes when I've had students whose fathers would show up to pick them up from school and they behaved very differently than when the grandmother or mother picked them up from school. So things like that might be the little nuances that we might have missed, but they matter. Then I got ahead of myself. I need to describe the antecedent. So that was a change in the environment that led to whether or not I was likely to see problem behavior or not, right? Do I know if the student has family visiting in town? So there's a lot of commotion at home, and maybe they're not sleeping in their own bed. Maybe they have to share a bed, or they're sleeping on a cot. That's not the best sleep. They're not coming in with their normal routine, right? Have they been sick for a while and they haven't attended school and now they're back in school? Those are things that are going on that I want to consider. And then I want to consider, all right, what's happening after I see this behavior occur, whether it's in my presence or across the room and I observe it. What happens immediately after that child engages in that challenging or problem behavior? What happens immediately after they get up and run around my classroom? Well, if someone's getting up and runs around after them, then that might be attention. But I'm documenting these things because I don't know yet, right? I'm not a mind reader. I can't read the future, can't predict the future. So at a minimum, I make sure I have at least 3 opportunities to observe these things. So I look for this pattern in my antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. I identify slow and fast triggers and I identify those consequences that seem to be the same across these instances, not just within a day, but it might take a month sometimes. It's taken me several, I think maybe 6 months is the longest time I've had to take data and collect it to try to figure out the function. And it turned out to be menstruation for a teenage girl. And so once a month was about the pattern that I found. And in that, when you start to see these patterns, develop a summary statement or hypothesis. So here's an example of like an ABC form, right? This chart. I would put the date and time. I might put my initials if someone else is also going to pick this up. I also like to put the behavior, like what it looks like, right, that operationalize it, like so that anybody else who picks up this form could know exactly what I'm talking about. But the antecedents try to describe as much as necessary. So a lot of information when I first start out, and then it might get pared down when I start to figure out a pattern. But the more information, the better, right? Until you start to see some factors or some variables that kind of carry over across events. And then always have a consequence, like, did they, and you can put attention, you can put those simple one words. Again, I like to describe it more often. Like, this assistant got up and ran around after the child, right? Or the sibling, right? They were the ones who, got more attention from the parent, and the parent ignored the child as a consequence. So there's the more information that you can put in, the better, but over time, you don't need to put as much. So that's how we come up with like the function of the behavior. And in this process, guess what you're doing? You're being a scientist. So this is the scientific method of forming a hypothesis. Why is the behavior occurring and why does it keep occurring? And these are the data that I'm collecting, okay? So when you said like summary statements, you want them to describe the antecedents, the behaviors, and the consequences, which is the reinforcing outcome, right? And so here's some examples on the screen of some summary statements, like, someone's hungry and they're asked to write their name on a worksheet, which handwriting usually evokes problem behavior for a lot of students, okay? And if they're engaging in a behavior where then they somehow don't have to do that handwriting task in that moment, they delay it, or they totally get out of it, well, then I will probably have an idea about that function. The function is probably escape from a non-preferred task. Okay? And so on this slide, we talk, like this shows you, is it attention seeking? Is it to get sensory input? Like if I have not received some adult attention in a while, and I've been sitting in a seat for a very long time, I might talk to myself, and I had students that would actually rock back and forth. And the sad thing is they just didn't find adults or people reinforcing anymore, right? And so after years, they were teenagers, and it was just really hard to engage them because early on, they weren't very engaged themselves, right? And so we want to try to figure this out as early as possible, by the way, in our students' lives so that years and years of consequences and antecedents don't build up and strengthen this problem behavior. So this is where behavior support plans come in, right? So this is how are we as a team gonna focus on changing behavior and reducing challenging behavior, but also improving their skills, right? And so this is going to be written in a manner that they should be based on that summary statement in the previous slide. Right? So just focus on that. It should be a good fit with the values of everybody involved. So first, the student, their family, and then the values of our educational community or our clinic, wherever we're working. What are our values in that setting? The resources we have available. Don't write behavior support plans that cannot be implemented. And so realistically, what tools do we have? And that includes staff. Okay. And then the skills of the people involved. Is everybody up to par, and can they be trained? Anybody, all stakeholders, in the procedures that we're going to talk about, right? So if, well, we're going to get to it. And then learners and parents. This is that anti-ableist movement. It's like, we are not experts in that individual. The individual is the expert in themselves, and their family is the expert first before we are, right? Because at the end of the day, we go home and we get paid to do a job. But at the end of the day, it's those values and beliefs and the desires and the goals of that learner and their parent that we should prioritize and then make it work with our team. And strategy should target all components of the ABCs. I don't know if you all can hear those sound effects, but they're making me laugh. I hope you can. Okay, so here's an example of a behavior support plan, very simple, okay? And so you've got the A, the B, and the C at top. And so you focus on one, not a bunch of different types of functions. You're focusing on one function. You might have a bunch of different behaviors that occur, like a kid may hit and kick and spit and drop to the floor. Like they do all of those different forms, but the consequence is the same. So we want to focus on, oh, they want to get out of a non-preferred task. The antecedent is presentation of this writing task. All of these behaviors might be seen, some or all, and then the consequences, they escape or avoid doing the task, right? And so what are the prevention strategies? This is where coming to the table as a team and everybody is very important, right? So there's the home component, prevention strategies. Maybe they're working on some handwriting at home as well. Maybe they're going to make sure that the child is coming to school well-fed, prepared. This is where the team talks about, okay, maybe our occupational therapist is going to give us some tips and the teaching strategies, right? So everybody can work on it in the classroom. And then consequence as well, we want to know what to do when we see the desired behavior, right? So when we see the student just pick up a pencil and write, then we want to reinforce that, right? We want to go ahead and praise them. So those are the things that would be written in there. So, functional communication training. Fancy term for just teaching learners a better way to communicate the same message that they have been communicating to us through challenging behavior. Okay? So the problem behavior, that behavioral excess, has been working for the individual. It's been functional. But we want to teach them a better way because it's more socially appropriate and probably a lot fewer calories in the long run than stress. And that's a replacement behavior, and that's an appropriate substitute. It's it's probably a skill that's very weak or absent or impaired that's in their repertoire, or completely not in their repertoire that we need to teach them and build up, okay? And if you want to see problem behavior go down, you need to see its equivalent, that more appropriate behavior, go up at the same time. So it's like a crisscross on the graph. So let's say that we have a fast sugar. I am a teacher, and I told the student to write their name on a piece of paper. It is difficult for them, right? So the student screams and hits me. Okay, so the fast trigger, that's immediate antecedent, right? And then I'm hit. Well, now I'm upset. I'm like, I'm upset, and maybe the kid gets up and runs, or I need to take a break. Then what's not happening is that writing their name on their sheet. Right? They're not doing it, so they have escaped. Sometimes we call it avoid too. Even if they're doing it later, in the moment, this minute, when I told them to write it, I meant now, not like an hour later. So there is some kind of escape there. But what if coming to school, they came into school being tired from not sleeping very well? Like, did I have knowledge of that? Maybe I wouldn't have asked the student to do this really difficult task, right? Now, the goal of this plan that I need to teach them, they're not writing their name on their paper. I really need them to learn to complete that task independently. Okay, and that's really the long-term goal. If I teach you, and the behavior to replace is complete task independently, then I'm going to have this consequence, and everybody in the plan is going to work on this, where we're going to praise the student for writing their name on their paper, and then that child, we want to create a sense of pride in them, that they see their name written on the paper and they're proud that they did it, right? But that's a long-term goal. It's going to take a while for us to get the student to complete the task independently, right? So in the meantime, maybe rather than going from 0, can't write their name at all, to writing their name completely, maybe I just need to teach them to ask for help, because that would serve the same function as screaming or hitting. And what happens is, if I can get you to ask for help instead of hitting me, it's better for the both of us, right? But in functional communication training, this may not make sense to most of you, and may seem like an issue. Bear with me. I'm going to teach you this step of asking for help. First, it's going to carry over to many aspects of your life, and it's a critical life skill, the ability to ask for help. But I also want to get rid of hitting. Okay, so if I'm reducing this problem of behavior of hitting, and then what ensues from that, I'll have more time to teach, because we're not dealing with this whole incident. So if I teach you to ask for help, you ask for help, I'm going to let you escape. Oh, thanks for asking for help. I'll help you, and I'll write it for them, or we'll fake pretend like they wrote it, and they don't have to do the task. I might just let them get up. I just reinforce ask for help and allow them to escape the task. Okay. But the behavior I'm trying to teach is asking for help so that I have more time to teach. Now, over time, as they get more fluent with that, I'm going to start fading in or introducing that independent task of writing your name. Okay. Like might be the first letter or second letter. So we slowly fade in the demands, but it's a critical skill, functional communication training. The child did not know how to tell me they couldn't do it and they needed help. And so that's where we start. So to look at prevention strategies back on the behavior support plan, this is where the team, again, needs to come together. What are the prevention strategies that we want to have in place or consider so that the child is ready to learn? Then we need to probably provide help to them choose the tasks that they want to do that they like, right? That they can complete independently, and then teach them, right, to ask for help. So that's functional communication training, that asking for help, and then gradually teach them to complete the task by themselves, fading in and increasing demand. And then consequence strategies. If they ask for help appropriately, like not hitting me, then I'm helping them or I'm reinforcing that aspect. Now here's the second bullet, because this will happen. I might forget. If a child screams and hits, you want to prompt them when they're calm and you're safe. I always want to put that when two people are safe. Then you want them to prompt them, help me, or help please, some kind of full verbal prompt to get them to say that, and then go ahead and help them, right? And so that in itself is that functional communication training, trying to teach them that, in lieu of hitting me, you really meant, I need help. So let me prompt you right now in this moment because you still need help. We've got to get this done, and I'm going to help you get it done. Right? I'm not allowing them to escape the task, but I'm prompting them in that moment that there's a better way than hitting. And in this proximal closeness in time, I need to use this as a teaching opportunity. Now, in this whole thing, we hopefully have lots and lots of opportunities to practice this throughout our day, rather than just one time a day. That would help the student really acquire the skill quickly. So, some examples of functional communication training that we might engage in is, if we've got this learner and they cannot dress themselves independently. It is too hard. So why would we just let them suffer and watch them not be able to dress themselves, right? So maybe we want to teach this learner to say or sign help. I don't know. So this is the US version of help. I'm not sure if that's South African. And so if a learner hits themselves hits themselves, and usually that bothers us as adults, right? So I'm going to attend to that behavior. Maybe we really need to say, I think they want me to play with them or attend to them, like give them attention. So in lieu of hitting themselves, I want to prevent that before they're likely to hit themselves. I'm going to give them a prompt to say, play with me. And then I'm going to play with them when they do engage in that behavior of play with me. If a learner hits another learner, when they're kind of too close, maybe it's that the student, and again, we would do the ABCs, so we would know these things. Maybe that functional communication aspect is going to be teaching them to say, I want to play by myself, or I want to play alone, right? Or please back up, give me more space. And please pick a lot of different phrases over time, especially in these situations. And then if a learner grabs for things, they're not making requests, so their wants and needs are not made known to us except by grabbing, well, then we want to teach them a better way to get those toys. I teach them to say, toy please, and doing requests. So there's a lot of other ways that you can teach new behaviors that go beyond the scope of this training today. Extinction, horrible name, I know, but it just means we won't get there, but it basically just means that, you just cut off that reinforcement. So if you used to give attention, you don't give attention anymore and to the same effect, or if you used to allow the child to get out of doing something, you don't allow that anymore. Differential reinforcement, that's just kind of like, a little bit of praise or a lot of praise, kind of magnitude of reinforcement. And then shaping. So we're not going to have enough time to go over those. And I do want to make sure that we get to, just looking at the time, okay, some general procedures. So we want to make sure that our problem behavior no longer works for the student. Right? And if it were for us, we want to make sure it doesn't work for us anymore. Right? And so that's extinction in the process is withholding reinforcement. So you got to know what those consequences are in order to withhold them, right? So that data sheet can be very helpful. With general functional communication training procedures, you wait to give the learner what they want, like that reinforcer, until they demonstrate that replacement behavior. Okay, so you're not going to give them what they want in absence of this new verbalization, right? This new sign. And when it's not happening, we want to prompt them. We don't want to sit back and wait for something to happen that's not going to happen. It's not in the learner's repertoire. So what we like to do is use a process of shaping, which is prompting the learner with that correct answer, that response pretty quickly, especially if this is a new thing that we're teaching. So there's no room to make a mistake, and they contact reinforcement right away. And the closer in time you do that, the quicker that you are able to deliver that reinforcer, the better, okay? The faster they learn, the more opportunities they have to learn. So this is, Trina, I don't know if you can unmute yourself or just orient us to this video.
Yeah, yeah, I can orient you to this video. So this is summer camp again, but this is a different set of kids. We had younger kids and older kids in our summer camp. And what you're gonna see here in this video is this little boy in the red, he's towards the back. He actually engages in some problem behavior to get something. He's asking for something. And the teacher there in the black and white, she is very careful to ignore the problem behavior, so withhold the reinforcer from that problem behavior, and then she prompts him or reinforces him or his behavior with the thing that he wants when he uses the replacement behavior. So that's what this is. It's just an example of functional communication training and what it looks like. Go ahead and push play.
Okay.
Okay, so you might not have heard, he was just like, he was kind of doing this squeal when he didn't have the straw, but he didn't ask for it. And then she figured out what it was he wanted, prompted him, went and got it, and then made sure that he said straw and then she gave him the straw. So that's as simple as functional communication training is. But you do it all day as the learner engages in these problem behaviors, or hopefully before they engage in those problem behaviors, right? You can prompt them to ask for the things that they want and need. All right, and the next.
Okay. And there's this video here.
Okay, in this video, I just pause it for just a second. Okay,
Yep.
in this video, this little boy in the green is using an AAC device, and one of the things that we had been working on is him using his device purposefully orienting towards a listener, because he used to just look at it, touch his device, but he wasn't necessarily communicating with anyone. And so what she's been trained to do, the teacher there, she's been trained to attend to him when he uses his device to get attention and he looks at her. So it's kind of like a more purposeful communicative interaction. And that's called differential reinforcement. And Megan mentioned it really quickly, but it means that you're waiting until a certain type of behavior that you're wanting to see, and that's when you reinforce. So you reinforce certain behavior and not others. Okay, go ahead and push play.
Oh yeah. Can you tell me a knock joke? Go ahead. I'd love to hear it. Hi, Dan. Hi, Courtney.
Cute.
I know.
Oh, is this a new one? Oh no, it's the same one. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, we got 3. Okay. All right. A few more slides, and I can turn it over to you. Do you want to say anything?
Oh, I thought this was where I was gonna pick up.
Oh, good. Oh, it is. Then good. I can use some water. Can you mute me again?
Yes, I'll mute you. Okay.
Thanks.
If I can. Yeah, it lets me mute you, but it doesn't let me unmute you. That's funny. Okay, thank you so much, Megan. She covered a ton of stuff about the function of behavior and functional communication training. It's as simple as learning what the purpose of that behavior is and trying to teach the child using positive reinforcement an alternate or replacement behavior for that problem behavior. And when we can do that, then we never have to use things like punishment or any kind of like other strategies except for positive reinforcement. And we want to do that because then the learner gets what they want and need. So up to this point, we have been talking about operant conditioning. Now, if you guys have had a psychology course, you've probably heard about this. Operant conditioning is the basis learning theories of applied behavior analysis. But really what operant conditioning means is that it's any procedure in which a response becomes more or less likely to occur depending on its consequences. So if we have this kind of like mantra, behavior is a function of its consequences. In other words, we do what we do because of the consequences that happen after the behavior, okay? And when learning occurs with those ABCs, it's all operant conditioning, okay? But there's a different kind of conditioning that's also very important for like clinicians and educators to be aware of. And oftentimes we're not very aware of what's happening, and it happens naturally, and it can be quite disruptive if we're not aware of it. And that's classical conditioning. It's also called Pavlovian or respondent conditioning. So if anyone's had a psych class, Pavlov's dog. And I'm just going to give you the example everybody knows in the textbook. What happened is Pavlov was a researcher. He was an experimental psychologist. And every day he entered into this room where the dogs were. And there was a bell that rang as he brought in the food to feed the dogs. Well, food is an unconditioned stimulus that elicits salivation, okay? And what he found is, so hold on, let me back it up. So the unconditioned stimulus is the food that elicits salivation. And the neutral stimulus is the bell that the dogs heard every time the food was presented. Now the bell by itself does not elicit salivation. However, after several pairings of the bell and food, bell, food, bell, food, bell, food, all of a sudden the bell can be presented without the food and the dogs will salivate. Okay, so that's a different kind of conditioning called classical conditioning. That neutral stimulus gains the same kind of control or power over the behavior as the unconditioned stimulus does. So it happens to have two stimuli paired together. That's the key piece of this type of conditioning. Okay, go ahead and advance it. So let me tell you about, as educators and therapists, you need to be careful about how things are being paired in your context. So this is an example of a setting. We're classically conditioning a setting. So let's say these conditioned reinforcers are a result of pairing a neutral stimulus with a known and reliable reinforcer. In this example, the music is something unconditioned. The learner likes music, okay? And the classroom becomes a conditioned reinforcer after several pairings of music with the classroom setting. So if the classroom is a place that music is often played and the child or the learner likes music, then eventually the classroom becomes a very safe place, okay? So as you pair that reinforcer or something that the child or learner likes, music, with a neutral stimulus, you can also be reinforcing appropriate responses through operant conditioning. This is a little complicated, but what I mean, go back to that slide. What I mean by that is that both of these types of conditionings happen at the same time, right? So if you were to take a learner from a classroom and into like a clinic room where it's just you and that learner, but good things are happening to that learner in that setting, then that setting becomes reinforcing by itself, and a great place for that child to be, as well as the things that you're using are reinforcing specific behaviors that you're trying to teach within that room. So operant and classical conditioning are happening at the same time, okay? And this also applies if a setting is, let's say there's a particular room in the school or a bedroom at home where something traumatic happened, okay? Or maybe it's a particular person, or it's, you know, something traumatic happened, an interaction with males. That traumatic experience would then be associated with whatever is going on in the environment. That room, that setting, that person, right, could be associated with that thing that was traumatic and aversive. And in which case, they would want to avoid that setting. So this classical conditioning happens all the time. And if you see someone engaging in behavior or like, I want to go away from this person or this setting, then it might be because they're associating it with something traumatic that happened, okay? All right, let me give you another example. So the conditioning of people. So here's an example. Let's say the teacher provides some tickles to a young child and the child really likes the tickles, but if the teacher keeps repeating tickle, 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 tickle over several sessions, then the teacher might become the person that child really likes because, hey, this is the lady that gives me what I like. This is the lady that tickles me, right? So we as people and as settings, or the settings in our environment, they can become paired with good things or bad things. Okay, go ahead and do the next example. So if you have difficult work and you're presenting it to a child and it's aversive to them and they're not able to do it, that means we're also being paired. The teacher is also being paired with that difficult work, right? And so we're paired with punishment. But we don't want to be paired with punishment. We want to be paired with reinforcement. We want to be the people that deliver the good stuff to these learners. Because if we do, then they will come to us for things and they will not engage in problem behavior to escape our presence. Go ahead, the next slide. So these are just some quick terms. Contingency means dependency between events. So if this, then this, right? So we often say that one event is contingent upon another or dependent on another. So if you eat your peas, you can have ice cream, right? So then ice cream is contingent or dependent upon eating their peas, okay? Now, we would also say non-contingent if there was no dependency between two events. So in other words, there was no response required to get a reinforcer. And sometimes that's a really good thing when we're trying to train. When we're trying to teach learners, we want to be associated with good things, whether or not there was a demand in place. There was not a behavior that we were trying to increase. Now, contiguity means nearness of events in time and space. So what I mean by that is in Pavlov's dog's experiments, the bell and the food were presented basically simultaneously or very close in time, okay? And so when we're pairing things, it's the things that are happening about the same time as the unconditioned stimulus, whether it's good or it's bad, whatever's happening in that nearness of time and space. Okay, I'm going to use these words in the next couple slides, I think. So that's why I wanted to explain it. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so here's some guidelines. When, so you know, the videos that you saw with the staff that I had running summer camp, before they ever put demands on the children, I made sure that they paired themselves with reinforcement. They had to be paired as positive, and I wanted children to be able to come to them. So I made sure to teach them how to do this first. So before I walk in there and say, here's your assignment, do this, 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 and this, you spend time with that learner, trying to pair yourself with all things positive. And I always make this corny joke. My name is Dr. Spencer, and I say, you want to be the dispenser of all good things, like me, Dr. Spencer, dispenser. Anyway, so you want to be the dispenser of all good things. And when you do, then the children will approach you, they'll follow your directions, they'll also, engage in the demands that you've put in front of them, as long as you're providing the support and need. So here are the guidelines for them. You want to present both the known reinforcer and the neutral stimulus at the same time, right? Contiguously, like the bell and the food. Okay, so you want them to be present at the same time. So if you are giving the kids tickle, 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 you are actually the neutral stimulus, and the reinforcer of tickling are being paired at the same time. They're presented at the same time. So that unconditioned stimulus, or you can even do this pairing with a conditioned stimulus, one that's already very strong. But anyway, it should be strong with little risk of satiation, right? Oftentimes, food becomes the primary thing that we use with individuals with disabilities. While that's an unconditioned stimulus, it is it can satiate quite quickly, because as soon as you've had 10 bites, you're full, and I don't want that anymore. Okay, so food's not necessarily a good unconditioned stimulus to use for this kind of pairing. It's more things like music, playing, reading, maybe touching, like appropriately, but like in a way that they like, maybe rubbing, deep pressure on their arms, something like that, or hand massage, something that's pretty simple. But those are the kinds of things that tend to be better for this pairing. Playing a game, running, jumping, things that the child likes to do, or the individual. And then you want to present many trials in the day of just presenting these two stimuli together. So you want to pair the neutral stimulus, like yourself, with a variety of things that that child likes. So when I train my staff, I say, you go into their home or their setting, wherever they are, and you play with them, you follow their lead, you sing to them, you play music for them, you jump, whatever it is that the child likes, you do that for 2 hours. You just play with them. And that whole time, all of the things that the child is happy, they're doing the things they want, and the therapist is being paired with all of those things. Okay, next slide. So as establishing yourself, the instructor or a therapist, as a conditioned reinforcer, what you do is you give known reinforcers for free, right? So don't put any demands on the child, just deliver them non-contingently. Then when the child starts to come to the context where you're teaching, like let's say at this table we're going to be doing lessons, you can then give the reinforcers liberally for them just being in that instructional location, for example. And then you also want to be careful that you don't give reinforcers, like you don't let them access things that you want to use for pairing with yourself. So for example, I might put, let's say the child really likes this toy. I want to be the one to hand that child the toy. I don't want to say, oh, go get the toy over there, or set it on the table and let the child get it. I want them to see me, have this really contiguous pairing where I am time and space, me with this toy, me with this toy. So you want to give them the reinforcing items. And you want to have that access be reliably through you. If they can access stuff on their own, why should they go to you? And you need them to come to you so that you can work with this individual for therapy or for teaching, whatever it is. And then you want to be very careful not to pair yourself with the removal of reinforcement or punishment. So a lot of times people will say, yeah, but they've got to give up the toy so that we can work on, like their instructional tasks. I said, that's great, but you don't have to take it from them. And they're like, what? And I said, well, have you ever asked the kid or taught the child to put that toy in that basket? You can put the child can put it in the basket, and then you can deliver attention or praise or some other type of reinforcer for them putting it in the basket. You don't want to be taking things away from kids that they like, right? Because then you're paired with the removal of that reinforcement or punishment, which is what that is. It's negative punishment, right? And so you don't want to have that attached and associated to you. You want to be the one to dispense all good things. So, you know, pairing yourself may take many trials and sessions before you can deliver demands, and that's okay. It's more important that you can build this great rapport with that learner, because if you have a wonderful rapport with that learner and you've created a safe, anxiety-free environment and interaction with them, they are going to be more ready to learn. They're going to be more able to learn, and they're going to enjoy it, and they're going to talk or do the things that you want them to do. Go ahead and advance. I think I have a slide that says that. So when children know that we are associated with the good stuff, they will follow our directions and work. But if we're associated with punishment, then they'll avoid us. And it's really important that we don't give demands until these learners really trust that doing the demand will improve their situation in life. That's kind of ultimately why we're there, is to help them improve and to give them, you know, basically quality of life. And they need to know that that's going to work for them. So this pairing and conditioning is just a very simple thing. You just, all I want you to know is walk away with pair yourself with good things and avoid pairing yourself with bad things. And that way you'll be more powerful as a therapist and instructor. And then of course, the functional communication. Oh, I forgot I had this video. This is the cutest thing in the world. So this is actually this little boy, Alex. He is, so Mandy, the therapist, is there to do a structured teaching session. And I can tell that she has paired herself and the instructional context so well, because when she walks in the door, the kid jumps up from watching TV, goes and sits in this chair over here, which is what he did. I didn't get the video on the video camera fast enough to capture him. But he's so excited about the opportunity to learn from Mandy that he gets to that place on his own. Where the opposite of this might be, where you enter the home or you enter the classroom and the kid goes and hides under his bed or hides in a closet or, you know, under the thing, or engages in some problem behavior when you're around. That's telling you you're paired with punishment, not paired with reinforcers. And so anyway, this is a really short video just showing you how excited this kid is. And I could tell immediately, this was my staff that I was supervising. I was like, wow, you have done a phenomenal job pairing, because look at how excited this kid is. Okay, go ahead.
Yay! Are you ready for cards, Alexander?
Yeah, he's just like so excited. Hey, Mandy's here. I get good stuff when Mandy's here. All right, we're pretty much at the end of our content. I recognize that it's a ton of content and we were going really fast, but our goal was really to give you some high level, like, hey, ABA isn't so bad if we're talking about the application of the science of behavior and learning, and that ABA therapy, air quotes again, doesn't have to be bad, right? It doesn't have to be bad, but it sometimes is in the way it's executed. And that could be clinic by clinic or school or individual by individual. And it's very difficult for consumers or families or other professionals to really understand the difference. But it's okay if you ask a lot of questions and explore that. And what I'd really like you to get out of this is that the science actually applies to your clinical and educational practice. We didn't have much time to talk about shaping, but that is one of the things that you use almost every day. I guarantee you, it doesn't even matter who you are. If you're a parent and have and have raised children, you have used shaping. Like, we use it all day, every day. But if we know more about the principles, we know more about the science, we become better at executing these or implementing these principles and these tactics. So these are some of the things that I wish that I could talk about today, or that Megan and I could really cover in more detail, but we would need, like I said, like 2 years to cover some of this content. But chaining is another procedure or another, a tactic that we use to kind of get really complex behaviors that require multi-step, right? So like brushing teeth or dressing, we might use chaining to do that. And a task analysis is also important. A task analysis is just breaking a larger, more complex behavior into smaller, teeny little steps, right? Into its parts. Schedules of reinforcement are about how frequently one delivers positive reinforcement. Because when you're first teaching somebody, you want to deliver a reinforcer every single time. But then after a while, it's like, how many stickers do I give this kid? You need to thin that out. So there's a whole technology around thinning out the schedules of reinforcement so that you're not giving them every single time they do that behavior. Eventually, you'd rather they do that behavior because they find the enjoyment in, for more like intrinsic motivation. And there's a technology and a science behind how to build that intrinsic motivation. Okay, and we do that through thinning the schedules of reinforcement. So transfer of stimulus control is the entire point of teaching. We teach under maybe some programmed stimulus conditions, and we want to transfer them to a generalized stimulus condition that's more natural occurring. By the way, transfer stimulus control, as ridiculous as the words are, they're terrible words, but it is my absolute favorite thing. And the work I do in designing instruction is all incorporating stimulus control and the transfer of that. And so I would say my favorite skill set is getting from, more intensive, kind of programmed instruction to very naturalistic, generative behavior. And you do that through the transfer of stimulus control, which of course we don't have time to tell you about, but I'm hoping to pique your interest a little bit. How about sensory diets? I know there's a number of occupational therapists on this meeting today, that sensory diets have everything to do with the principle of satiation and deprivation. And I love sensory diets. And a lot of behavior analysts are like, no, we don't do that sensory stuff. Well, they're mistaken, because that's not true. There is a whole science around how to use like sensory inputs and how to help children regulate their sensory systems through the systematic and intentional application of a sensory diet. You can help satiate that need and keep them in a balance so that you can prevent problem behavior. Of course, prompting and prompt fading, that's probably the most common things that most people know, like gesture prompts, visual prompts, interest stimulus prompts, and then fading procedures like least to most and most to least, none of which are my favorite, but I don't have time to tell you exactly the better way to use prompts and prompt fading. But there's a whole technology around that from our science. Motivating operations, that would be my other most favorite thing in the whole world, because if somebody doesn't want something, then we can't get him to do it. Otherwise, that's called coercion. And we see a lot of coercion in like the ABA therapy industry, because kids are forced to sit at the table, need to a therapist for long hours, and the only thing that's motivating them is the opportunity to escape that. And I know this because I've often been called in to rectify serious behavior problems, or like high profile cases going to court or something like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this kid was tortured because they put him in front of at this table for hours, and all he wants to do is get out. And of course that's what he wants to do. He's 4. He shouldn't be sitting at a table all day. But motivating operations is the science and technology around how to adjust those antecedents that really contrive or take advantage of what's already naturally motivating for children, like using play, or like physical stimulation, like jumping on a trampoline, or something like that, that would you would be able to integrate your therapy or your instruction into something that the children already like to do, rather than taking them away from something they like to do to do work, right? So there's a whole science around that. And discrimination is really simple, but it is a key. It's key for things like following directions, labeling objects and actions. And then generalization and maintenance are another area that I really, really love, is because the research that I do is not really about acquisition, but it's how do I get new skills to generalize and maintain in the natural environment. And so I really appreciate that technology. And verbal behavior, verbal behavior is a wonderful, it's basically a functional approach to communication, where oftentimes we're thinking about what the communication looks like, how many words somebody's using, what grammatical structures they're using. In verbal behavior, we look at it, is it requesting, is it labeling, commenting, answering questions, is it repeating? So we really take this functional communicative functions approach to it, and it actually informs how we teach it, which is different than if we were to use a structural approach to communication. And then systematic desensitization, also, let's say somebody's sensitive to textures or, colors or shape, all sorts of things. This is a technology to help reduce anxiety around particular things. These are just a couple examples of things that we could have talked about today that would be relevant to your practices. And like I said, that article came out in April. It's called ABA from A to Z, 350 applications, or application of the science to 350 domains. 350. It was pretty amazing how much research there is of the science of behavior that is applied to educational or clinical practice. Okay, what's the next slide? I think we're done. Yes, this is the time for questions. And let me just say to go ahead and put the next slide. If you have questions about individual cases or something like that, there's no way we can possibly address any of those, but you're welcome to email. I might be able to refer you to somebody that might be able to help out. So my contact information is on there. And if you really want to talk to Megan, I can get a message to her. But I'm the one that's in South Africa right now, and she'll be leaving on Tuesday to go back to the US. Okay, but you can get a lot of free tools at trinastoolbox.com, and you can email me at trinaspencer@usf.edu. Okay.
Thank you.
Kirsten, what do you think?
Trina, thank you very much. And we do have, I think, 2 minutes for questions. So I will hand over. I think we will probably be able to take only 1 or 2. So if there are any questions, please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask. Your chance is now. I don't see any immediate questions. I'll make some observations in the meantime. But yeah, please go ahead. Either type. You can also type in the chat if you would like to, if you prefer to use that. Thanks, Shakira. Thanks for your comment.
Hi. Sorry, I have unmuted myself. May I ask?
Yes, go for it. Sorry, who is speaking now? Is it Waltraud?
It's Waltraud, yeah, Waltraud Stryver. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just asking a general question. Tell me if it doesn't fit into this, what we are talking about today. If a child constantly gets negative feedback from a father or the mother to say, you're not good enough, you're not going to make it in life, over a period of time, how would you handle that? Let's say the negative conditioning, if I may say so. How would you handle that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the simplest answer is you have to recondition, right? So that individual, the learner who's getting that negative feedback all the time, needs to get better positive feedback, and the person who's giving it needs to learn how to give it. And they just need to be reconditioned. That's the simplest answer. Okay. So yeah, so let's say it's the father. If you can try really hard to get the father to not. So I actually had this experience. I have a particular son, and my husband was always correcting him, and there wasn't enough positivity. And so I said, honey, all you get to do is say good things about this child. That's your job. Say good things about this child. I will do the redirections. I will do the correction procedures, right? Because I was paired really well. So the child was getting good and, more good than bad. And I also, there's an 80-20 rule here, 80-20 applies to everything, is that if 80% of your interactions with an individual are positive, then the 20% of redirections will be effective. But if you are out of balance of that, it's not going to be effective at all. So any of that criticism or redirection or correction is not going to work anyway if there's not at least 80% of that interaction to be positive. Okay.
Thank you.
Michelle
Thank
asked,
you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Michelle asked a question about teaching conversational skills. Well, I mean, I can't really explain all of that in this, but I have a study. One of my very first studies was doing exactly that, teaching conversational skills like through art. And it was, you know, it's complicated in terms of the teaching procedure, so we didn't even cover half of them, but it has a lot to do with transfer of stimulus control, prompting and prompt fading, and making sure that there's reinforcers or things that the child wants. Because if they don't want to talk to somebody, then you almost can't force them to do that. So it has a lot to do with like an individual child and what the naturally motivating conditions would be for that individual. But it's very possible. I love teaching conversational skills. I do the research, and I actually have a lot of research in this area. But I would suggest maybe looking at one of my websites at Trina's, let's see, which one? Trina's Toolbox. I have some videos. You can also look up at YouTube and look for like, just look up some videos of mine. You'll see these conversational kind of videos of me teaching kids. At Trina's Toolbox, there's a young child with autism that I'm teaching. And anyway, all of those teaching procedures are based in the science of behavior and learning.
Thanks so much, Trina. Thanks for those answering those questions, and thank you for a very, very interesting presentation. I really also wish we had had more time because I think there were some very interesting strategies that you particularly mentioned in that last slide that I'm sure a lot of us would love to know more about. But yeah, thank you also for giving us your contact details and your websites. So I think we also have words to look up and more research to read, more things to read up. And as you said, there is a wealth of information out there. So I certainly really appreciated this demystifying applied behavior analysis and the science of behavior and learning. I really learned a lot and can, now understand and in a way also judge those things in a much more objective and good way. And as you say, have also learned that a lot of what I do as a therapist is based on this science. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed the workshop. I would like to thank all of the participants who availed themselves on a Friday afternoon. And yeah, I really do hope that you also gained from it. We will be sending out a little evaluation sheet as well, so you can also share with us what you thought. And yeah, thanks a lot everybody for making the time this afternoon. And yeah, go well and have a wonderful weekend. Keep warm, keep healthy, and until we meet again. Any last words from you, Trina?
The only thing I wanted to say is that remember, learning about learning and behavior takes time. And the more you practice it, the more you implement it, the better you're going to learn it. And the more tools you're going to be able to derive from that science of learning. So I think this was more of like a let's tickle your interests so that you're motivated to learn more about an amazing, powerful science. Right. And it's not about turning you into an ABA therapist. That's not what I am. I never was. And I don't want to be. I want to be an effective analyst that applies the science regardless of who my learner is. And I just thank you for being here. And you can let me know if you want to hear more about some of those other topics. That's fine too.
Thanks so much, Trina. I do have a very last request before people log off, those that are still on. Would you maybe mind just switching on your video? It's a control at the bottom of your screen and kind of in the middle with a video camera.
It's not already on.
No, sorry, I mean everybody else that's still in the room.
Oh.
I would just like to take a screenshot if people are willing,
I
so that we can have a picture or a visual reminder of this workshop. I'm not sure if people are able to. Thank you. I see, Amina, you've switched on your video. Anybody else that's still in there and still has time, would really appreciate it. If some people can switch on their video. Thank you, Elaine. Thanks, Elaine. Zama, I'm just going to call out people's names. Dineo, Aline, would you mind sharing your video? Thank you, Boipelo. Thanks so much. Just for the sake of a screenshot, I apologize to keep you waiting. And I realize that some people might not have dressed up for the occasion. That is, after all, the benefit of doing a workshop from the comfort of your home or your office. So if anybody else would be willing to share their video, that would be fantastic. Oh, it seems like only 4 people are brave enough. All right, I'm not going to keep you waiting. I'm just going to take a screenshot as is then. Oh boy, Pelo, you already left. There's Nicolette. Thank you. There's Pauline. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you, ladies. Thanks for your patience. Thanks a lot. All right, I think we've got it. I will let you go now. Thank you very much for your attendance and thanks for your patience. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everybody.